August 14th, 1972, Chatsworth, California. The Santa Susana foothills in August smell like dry grass, hot iron, and the particular kind of patience that only comes from men who have spent their lives around firearms. The hills rolled golden and brown in every direction, studded with scrub oak and loose shale, baking under a sun that had been relentless since before 7 in the morning. Down in the flat below the ridge, a private shooting range had been carved out of the earth over the previous decade, a serious facility, not a club range with numbered lanes and safety briefings, but a working ground where working people came to stay sharp. Steel silhouette targets at regulation distances, electronic timing equipment mounted on a low concrete platform, a long covered shooting bench with spent brass ground into the dirt beneath it like a layer of geology, a water cooler that nobody trusted, and a coffee thermos that everyone did. The air had that amber quality August gets in the California hills, thick, still, smelling of scorched chaparral, and the faint mineral bite of spent gunpowder that never entirely cleared. Hawks circled in the thermals above the ridge. Down below, everything was still except for the occasional clang of steel and the low conversation of men who didn't need to fill silence to feel comfortable in it. This was the kind of place where reputations got tested without announcements. If you are someone who believes the real story of a legend lives not in the films or the magazine profiles, but in the quiet moments between all of that, the moments that never made it into print, then you are in exactly the right place. Subscribe right now, hit the bell, and join the people who refuse to let these stories disappear. Clint Eastwood arrived at 10 that morning in a dust-covered dark green pickup truck, alone, with a range bag on the passenger seat and the relaxed manner of a man who has been doing this for 20 years and has never once found it surprising that he is good at it. He was 42 years old, with the tall, lean build and sharp, angular jaw that cameras had been falling in love with since the late 50s. His eyes had that quality, narrow, permanently slightly squinted, reading the distance even when there was nothing there to read, that directors paid him enormous sums of money to aim at audiences. He wore a khaki canvas work shirt with the sleeves rolled past the elbow, straight-leg Levi's, and dusty cowboy boots that had seen genuine outdoor use rather than wardrobe department aging. By 1972, Clint Eastwood was not a man who walked anywhere anonymously. Dirty Harry had been released the previous December and had done to his career what a matched engine does to a race car, the same machine, suddenly doing things it hadn't done before, with everyone paying very close attention. He was famous in the way that serious actors who become movie stars are famous, not just recognized, but felt. People adjusted themselves when he entered a room. The force of a person's public presence is a real thing, not metaphor, and Eastwood's was considerable. He set up at the far shooting station with the efficiency of someone who has never needed to be shown how anything works. Range bag open, ammunition sorted, holster adjusted once and not again. He checked the electronic chronometer with the attention of a man who takes measurements seriously, not to prove anything, but because the number was real information and he valued real information. Danny Marsh was the range assistant that morning. 26 years old, lean, with brown hair and an earnest face, still carrying some of the openness of someone who hadn't had it entirely trained out of him. He'd grown up in the San Fernando Valley, his father a tool and die machinist who taught him early that craft was the only honest currency. He'd been working at the range for 3 years while building connections towards stunt work. A genuinely good shot, better than most civilians who used the range, not as good as the professionals. He knew the difference and accepted it. He had made the mistake that morning of attempting to demonstrate his own draw speed on the timing equipment before the range had filled up. His time, 0.38 seconds. Not bad, legitimately not bad for a non-competition shooter. He'd been pleased about it in the quiet way of a person who sets a personal record without witnesses. Eastwood had arrived while Danny was reviewing the printout. "What's your time?" Eastwood asked, not unkindly, unloading his bag. Danny told him. Eastwood nodded, set up his equipment, and without any particular ceremony drew and fired from his custom holster. The chronometer stopped at 0.31 seconds. He looked at the number the way a craftsman looks at a measurement he already knew was correct. Then he glanced back at Danny with an expression that managed to be almost friendly while still carrying the complete indifference of a man who has never seriously considered that anyone in his radius might occupy the same tier. "Keep practicing," he said, and smiled, the smile of a man who has earned the right to be comfortable in his superiority and knows it. Danny said nothing. He went back to his duties, but his jaw was set in the way jaws set when something small lands in a place that was already sore. If you've ever watched Steve McQueen on screen and felt that particular quality he had, not of performing confidence, but of simply being too substantial to be moved, then you already understand what was about to happen. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it right now, because what McQueen does next is exactly that quality in the real world at a shooting range in the Santa Susana Hills on a hot August morning in 1972. Steve McQueen had been at the range since 8:30. He had arrived on a 1970 Husqvarna 400 crosser, dusty from the ride through the hills, and he had been working at the middle shooting station for 90 minutes before Eastwood's truck came up the access road. By the time Eastwood arrived, McQueen had already put several hundred rounds downrange, worked through 3 different draw exercises, and was sitting on the edge of the shooting bench with a cup of coffee, resting his right hand and watching the morning heat build over the ridge. He was 42 years old, wearing a worn dark navy cotton work shirt with sleeves rolled to the elbow, faded Levi's 501 jeans, dusty brown leather boots. His Persol 714 folding sunglasses were pushed up on his head. Sandy blonde hair slightly damp from the morning's work, 3 days of stubble on his jaw. He looked like a man at a shooting range who had been there for a while and was not performing anything for anyone. He and Eastwood knew each other the way men in the same profession and city in the same era know each other, not friends, not strangers. Mutual awareness, mutual assessment. They had calibrated each other at a distance, without that calibration ever requiring acknowledgement. McQueen had watched Eastwood's 0.31-second draw from the middle station. He had watched the chronometer. He had watched Danny Marsh's face. He had drunk his coffee. He had not moved. Eastwood worked through his morning session with the focused intensity of a serious practitioner. His technique was genuinely exceptional, the draw smooth and economical, the transition to the firing position without wasted motion, the trigger work clean. He ran the timing equipment 6 more times over the next 40 minutes. His times clustered between 0.29 and 0.33 seconds. He noted each one in a small notebook he kept in his range bag. He was not showing off. He was working, but he was doing it at a volume, in terms of presence and assertion of space, that made the range feel like his range. At one point, a third shooter arrived, Ray Cooley, a film industry firearms consultant in his 50s who had spent 30 years teaching actors to handle weapons safely. Ray set up at the near station and ran slow, deliberate draws, working on mechanics rather than time. Eastwood watched and said, loud enough to carry, "Ray, you ever time yourself?" Ray said he didn't bother. Eastwood said timing was information, nothing hostile in it. But a hierarchy was being established in the air of that range, as clearly as if someone had drawn it on a whiteboard. McQueen still hadn't moved from the bench. Around 11 o'clock, Danny Marsh made a second run on the timing equipment. He'd been thinking about his mechanics, adjusting his grip position, working through the specific sequence of the draw in his head during the intervals when he wasn't needed for range duties. His second time, 0.36 seconds, 2/100ths faster than his morning record. He was quietly pleased. He noted it in his own head without announcing it. Eastwood happened to be walking back from checking his target when the chronometer stopped. He glanced at the readout, then at Danny, then back at the readout with an expression that had nothing mean in it, nothing deliberately cruel, but which carried the specific density of a man for whom 0.36 seconds was so far from interesting that he genuinely wasn't sure what to say about it that would be useful. He settled on, "You're consistent at least." It was not intended to wound, but it did. Danny began breaking down the timing equipment to move it to a different station. His movements were controlled and professional, the way movements are when a person is making sure they don't reveal what's happening inside them. Steve McQueen set his coffee cup down on the bench. He stood up. He walked to the timing equipment station at a pace that covered the ground without broadcasting anything. He stopped beside Danny, who looked up with the slightly wary expression of someone who has already had a long morning and is not certain what's coming next. McQueen looked at the chronometer, then at the steel silhouette target downrange, then at Danny. "Run it again," he said. Danny looked at him. "For me." McQueen nodded once. Danny reset the timing equipment. McQueen stepped to the shooting position, adjusted his stance, not the competition-optimized posture he could have used, but something more grounded, more compact, and looked downrange at the silhouette. On the signal, McQueen drew. His time, 0.44 seconds. Not fast, noticeably, measurably not fast, slower than Danny, significantly slower than Eastwood. The chronometer was clinical about it. Eastwood had turned from his station. He looked at the number. His expression didn't change much, but there was something in it, a slight relaxation that looked like satisfaction but was trying not to be obvious about it. McQueen looked at his own time. Then he did something that nobody on that range expected. He drew again and missed. Not by a mechanical error. The shot was clean, the technique sound. But he had aimed at the outer edge of the silhouette and hit exactly where he aimed, rather than center mass. He looked at Danny. "Where would you be standing?" he said. Danny frowned. "What?" "In an actual situation. Where would you be standing? How far away? Would you be facing me? Would there be other people? Would you be moving?" Danny was quiet. "Would the light be like this, straight overhead, or would it be coming from behind you? Would I know you were going to draw before you drew? Or would I be reading your hands, your shoulders, your weight shift, trying to figure out if this was the moment?" The range had gone quiet. Ray Cooley had stopped working his mechanics and was listening. McQueen holstered his weapon, then drew again, this time not looking at the target, but looking at a point 12 inches to the left of the steel silhouette, the way you look at a person rather than a target, reading the whole shape rather than aiming at a specific point. His time was 0.41 seconds. The shot hit center mass. He turned to Danny. "Your 0.36 is a real number," he said. "In the conditions where that number exists, it's a good number. But those conditions don't exist anywhere except here. The light will be wrong, the distance will be wrong, you'll be tired or cold or running or none of those things, and the person across from you will not wait for a start signal." He ejected the spent case, reloaded with the precise, unhurried movements of a man who has done this 10,000 times in circumstances where getting it wrong had consequences. "The timer is a tool," he said. "It tells you something real about one specific thing under specific conditions. What it doesn't tell you is whether you can read a situation before it becomes a shooting situation, whether you can make a correct decision under stress, whether you can function when your hands are shaking because your heart rate is 200 and everything is happening faster than thought. The number is the beginning of the question, not the answer to it." He looked at Eastwood. Not as a challenge, not with aggression or theater. Just looked at him the way you look at someone when you're saying something to a room, and one of the people in the room is the specific person it's meant for. Eastwood held the look for a moment. His expression hadn't changed much from its default, but something in it had rearranged itself. The easy superiority that had been sitting in the atmosphere of the range all morning had lost some of its pressure. He glanced at his own chronometer notebook, then closed it and put it back in his bag. McQueen turned back to Danny. "Come here," he said. Danny stepped forward. "Show me your draw, not for time, just the mechanics." Danny drew slowly, deliberately, without the timing equipment running. McQueen watched his hand, his wrist, the angle of his elbow at full extension. He made 3 small adjustments: a grip position, a wrist angle, a weight distribution change, with the specific, economic precision of a man who has spent years understanding not just how to do something, but why the how matters. "Try it now," he said. Danny drew, slower than his timed run because he was thinking about the mechanics, but something in the movement had changed. There was a directness to it, a lack of wasted motion in the first inches of the draw where most of the time is lost. "Again," McQueen said. Danny drew again, and again, 7 times, each one sharper than the last. McQueen watched all 7 without speaking. Then, "You'll find your own timing, but the mechanics first. The mechanics are what survive when everything else goes wrong." He picked up his coffee, found it cold, set it back down. He looked at the range, the steel targets, the electronic equipment, the golden hills behind the ridgeline. "Here's what the timer can't measure," he said, not to anyone specifically, to the air of the range. "It can't measure whether you hesitated because you weren't sure. It can't measure whether you drew when you shouldn't have or held when you should have drawn. It can't measure whether you stayed calm enough to see clearly when everything in your body was telling you to panic. All of that is invisible to the chronometer, and all of that is what determines whether you go home." He gathered his equipment with the same quiet efficiency with which he'd arrived 3 hours earlier. Range bag closed, ammunition put away, the station left clean. As he passed Danny on the way to the parking area, he paused. He reached into the range bag and withdrew a small notebook, not for Danny, for himself. He tore a page from the back, wrote something on it, and handed it to Danny. It was a name and a phone number. A trainer McQueen had worked with for the getaway, a former law enforcement firearms instructor who ran courses that had nothing to do with timing equipment and everything to do with the situations timing equipment couldn't simulate. "Tell him I sent you," McQueen said. "Tell him you need the real curriculum." He walked to the Husqvarna, started it on the first kick, and rode north up the access road and into the hills without looking back. Ray coolly watched the dust settle on the road after the motorcycle disappeared around the ridge. He looked at Clint Eastwood, who was still standing at his shooting station. Eastwood was looking at his chronometer notebook, which was still closed. After a long moment, Eastwood opened it to the page with his morning times. He looked at the numbers: 0.31, 0.29, 0.33, 0.3, and then he closed it again and put it in the outer pocket of his range bag rather than the main compartment where he usually kept it. He ran the timing equipment one more time before he left. His time was 0.31 seconds. He noted it, then added something beside the number in small print that Ray Cooley, watching from across the range, couldn't read. What he wrote only Eastwood knew. Danny Marsh called the number on the paper that same afternoon. He trained with the instructor McQueen had recommended for 2 years. He eventually transitioned into stunt work, where he spent 22 years, retiring in 1996 with a career that people in the industry described in terms that had nothing to do with speed and everything to do with judgment. He kept the torn notebook page in his wallet until the wallet wore out. Then he transferred it to a new one. Steve McQueen never told this story publicly. He never told most of his real stories publicly, which is why the ones that survive come from the people who were there, who kept them in their wallets and their memories for decades before anyone thought to ask. He understood something about speed that took most people a lifetime to learn, and some people never did. The fastest person in a controlled environment is not the same person as the person who survives an uncontrolled one. Speed is a subset of competence. Competence is a subset of judgment. And judgment is the thing that can't be timed, can't be printed on a chronometer readout, and can't be earned by standing at a shooting station under perfect conditions with a start signal you know is coming. What ran through that range on August 14, 1972, and left with the dust from a Husqvarna 400 heading north into the hills was something the equipment was never built to measure. If you want more stories from the real life of the most authentic man Hollywood ever produced, the moments between the films, the things that happened at shooting ranges in the California hills when nobody was keeping official score, subscribe right now. Leave a comment. Tell us what stayed with you. We read every one, and we'll see you in the next one.